I think we're going to get started, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm super excited to talk to you guys today about improving usability with animation. How many of you guys didn't get in line early enough to see the guys for Silicon Valley? All right, I got some of the stragglers. That's okay. Hopefully this will be worth your time. My name is Anjali Ahuja, and I work as a UX engineer on the user research and analytics team here at Salesforce. Before I get started, I have to show you this forward-looking statement. I'm going to show you some awesome stuff today, but please make sure you only make purchasing decisions based on what you see in the product right now. Thank you. So before I can talk about how to improve usability with animation, I want to ask, what is animation? When I first started here at Salesforce and my manager mentioned that I would be working on some animation projects, I had this nostalgic throwback to my childhood. I was like, I'm going to be building monsters and Boo for Monsters, Inc. I love Pixar. I was super pumped. And then I realized it's not exactly what she meant when she meant animation. So how does animation fit into the enterprise space? In enterprise, animation means a lot of different things. It can mean the signature style of your product. It refers to effective transitions between complex user interfaces. It refers to a responsive user interface between mobile, tablet, and desktop. It really means the feel, about the look and your feel of your product. And together, all of these things combined create kinetic user interfaces. So when I use the word animation throughout this presentation, what I really mean is a combination or all of these things. So keep that in mind when looking through these examples. So why should you care about this? Why should we invest time and money and resources and engineering resources into building animation in the enterprise space? Great animation and great user experience enhances clarity for the user. It drives efficiency to help them achieve their day-to-day tasks better and faster. It builds consistency across a product ecosystem and across seemingly unrelated components in the ecosystem. And lastly, it embodies beauty. It gives your user something thoughtful and elegant to look at. And together, these 4 design principles drive every decision we make here at Salesforce and are the design principles of our Lightning Design System. So what makes animation effective? How do we build animation that achieves those 4 design principles? The first principle of animation is timing. Objects should move and feel natural and follow the forces of the real world, like gravity and weight. To do this, we use CSS timing properties and curves, like easing and cubic Bezier curves. Let's take a look at an example. This first object enters a screen with no animation. The second object enters on a linear curve and feels kind of mechanical and unnatural. And the third object enters on a cubic Bezier curve. So this one kind of refers to like how a car would slow to a halt at a red light. It feels natural to the user and recognizable as something in the real world, and it grounds that object where it belongs in the screen. The second principle of animation is choreography. Animations across your ecosystem should build narrative and feel logically related to each other. To do this, choreography consists of 4 main concepts. First, the sequence of motion. So this is the order in which things take place in your screen, the way objects enter, and what message that conveys to your user. Second is secondary action. How does an interface respond to a user when the user performs an action in the interface? Third, CSS timing tokens. CSS timing tokens provides consistency and recognizable patterns to your user, especially when objects are entering and exiting the screen. And lastly, which I think is most unique to animation that you can't achieve with the static or 2D interface, is the movement through 3-dimensional space. Animation takes use of the Z-axis, creating a visual hierarchy of importance of information to the user. Through animation, you can elevate more important things in that visual hierarchy or push back less relevant things for your user. Let's take a look at an example. So this is a website that I love scrolling through because it has really effective choreography and combines those 4 components that I just mentioned. On scroll, we see the product expand, making use of this 3-dimensional space, allowing the user to explore the product without having to click through static screens or pictures. In addition, the order through which the objects enter the screen show most relevant information first and least relevant information last. Together, the use of consistent timing tokens creates recognizable patterns on how that information gets loaded onto the screen. And as the user scrolls, depending on the speed of scroll, the way the objects move in the page change. That encompasses the secondary action component that I mentioned earlier. So this is an example of really effective choreography. So now that we know how to make effective animations and kind of what the building blocks of that is, animation together can solve many design challenges for the user. Let's take a look at some examples. First, animation solves the challenge of telling the user where they are in the product. In this example, a user is logging into Salesforce. By clicking onto the input fields, they get that confirmation that they're entering information into the form. On submission, the cloud logo gets anchored into the global navigation at the top. Anchoring that navigation before the data loads into the screen gives the user time to create a mental model of how to navigate through that application. Let's dig deeper into application navigation. In this case, the user's in the application, they've seen their core data, but now they want to navigate to a new object. Especially at Salesforce, where different objects show vastly different types of data through different visualizations, it's important to create a consistent narrative between these seemingly unrelated objects. By using consistent timing tokens, letting the data exit the screen, and having that new application navigation enter before the data loads gives time for the user to create a mental model of the new page. Another example that we see every day on our phones that gives context and orientation is natural feedback, like in a list. The subtle bounce that you see at the top and the bottom of the list lets the user know that they're at the top and bottom, and there's no information that's left to load. This is a good example of full transition choreography that provides orientation to the user. The physical transition of the whole page moving leftward lets the user know they can always navigate back to that home page and access those tiles by clicking on that back arrow, but they're grounded in this new part of the application. Another design challenge that animation can solve is, what can I do here? This is especially important when a user is going through complex flows or they're working with a new product or feature that they've never used before. In this case, a user is trying to send an email and they're faced with a lot of awesome tools that Salesforce provides, but they're not really sure what to do. This simple animation of an opacity change and the modal entering through a translate raises that modal in the visual hierarchy and brings relevant information to the user without having them lose context in what they're doing or where they are in the application. They can easily dismiss this modal and go back to what they were doing. Animation can also inform action. This is a page that has many different components on it. The user can navigate to all these different objects. They have tons of different data presented to them, and the really subtle animation of that bell ringing guides attention and creates a recognizable pattern when there's new information that's relevant and awaiting the user. In this case, animation is focusing attention. A user wants to start a trail and trailhead to learn Service Cloud basics, but the Service Cloud trail has 9 modules and hundreds of different units to start on. This simple animation of the tray expanding guides the user's attention to where they need to start on that trail. This is one use case of animation that I love. Is something happening? Every morning when I turn on my phone, I see the screen on the left. It's often accompanied by this feeling of impatience and anxiety because I want my phone to turn on and I don't know if it's working. We recently acquired a Google Pixel to do some testing here at Salesforce, and the first time I turned on the Pixel, I saw this really beautiful and joyful animation. It turned a moment that was normally associated with anxiety and impatience into a moment of delight. Not only did Google let me know that the phone is working, it's on, it's loading, but they used this moment to strengthen their brand and provide something playful for the user. An example we love here at Salesforce is our release logos. So anytime you've logged into Salesforce, you've probably seen one of these, whether it's Astro or Sassy Seagulls. But we use this as not only a way to strengthen our brand, but it aids in perceived load time for the user. Imagine if you logged into Salesforce and you just saw a static white screen for 5 to 7 seconds while we load all your data and tools and instrumentation. Instead, you get to see this joyful release logo. It lets you know what release you're on and gives us the time to load your relevant information. Another use case of animation is in transition states. So oftentimes, the user is trying to perform an action in an application, and after it performs the action, there's nothing left for the user to do but wait. Often these moments can be accompanied by anxiety and impatience, but having a simple animation can let the user know that something is happening. On the left, we see this radial movement of a Google Hangout call being placed. In doing this, the user knows that the other person is being reached and there's nothing left for the person to do. That same pattern is repeated on the right with the radial movement in an Uber. When you're calling an Uber, a lot of times you're waiting for that Uber to be matched and you want your car, and that simple radial movement lets you know it's working and something is happening in the app. Another design challenge that animation solves is, did that work? Confirmation of user tasks. In this case, a user is trying to send an email. On submit, the entire email template morphs into an envelope and gets sent off into the cloud. A few really subtle things are happening here. Not only are we confirming that the user's email was sent, but we're bringing in our own brand here that we're sending off data into the cloud and differentiating it from traditional email clients like Gmail or Yahoo. We're confirming this again with the toast that drops down, so if a user chooses to turn off animations, they still get that relevant information. We see this all the time through user input validation. In this case, if a user enters an incorrect password, rather than pressing submit and then having to re-enter the entire form, animation takes advantage of the real estate that's already on the screen by letting the user know that something's incorrect. On success, they're greeted with this big check mark of success, and they get that validation that what they did was correct. In addition, animation can be used to bring a moment of delight into a product that generally is rare, especially in an enterprise app like Salesforce. Favoriting a page not only confirms that, yes, you successfully favorited the page, but we're now associating this moment of delight and this repeated pattern into the product. So animation not only solves design challenges for the user, but it strengthens the brand of your product. Let's take a look at a few examples. So one really easy example of this is through dynamic logos. On the left, we can see our static logo of the Salesforce experience, which is a great logo. I like this logo. But on the right, we see this logo totally come alive. So it starts with LED electrons, symbolizing intelligence in our product, breathing a little bit, symbolizing that our product is dynamic and growing and constantly changing. Together, when it expands, it forms our geometric cloud, referencing that we have this huge ecosystem of products, and together they combine to build our Salesforce experience. So in a really simple animation, we are conveying many messages of our brand, which I think is much more powerful than the static logo on the left. Another example of strengthening your brand is using places in your app that you're not showing data to your customers, or it's not being used for a graph, but you're bringing in themes from other parts of your product into the application. In this case, we use real estate to bring in themes from Trailhead in a way that's non-intrusive, but ties together the product and lets our users know they're always empowered to learn our product through Trailhead. This is an example I love of signature style through Google Material Design's Motion. And it's, okay, here we go. So Google Material Design, their design system, uses really consistent timing tokens and signature movements so that when you look at the motion or the examples of animation, you can tell this is a Google product. This sort of consistent choreography has strengthened their brand narrative across their massive product ecosystem and is a great example of how you can use motion to promote your signature style. But wait, what about performance? I'm an engineer. I know a lot of developers at Salesforce really are always like, why do we need animation? It's not performant. It's bad for our users. It doesn't belong in the enterprise space. And we believe that for a long time too. But there are 4 CSS transitions that are really easy on the browser and have a very low hit to performance: position, scale, rotation, and opacity. The majority of the animations that I showed you in this slide deck use these 4 CSS transitions and will still result in over 60 frames per second rendering of your interface. So try to stick to these 4 transitions when implementing animation. Additionally, if you don't want to just animate those 4 properties, use the will change property to make your animations more performant. This lets your browser know what property you're trying to change, so the browser isn't constantly looking to update your screen. If you're using JavaScript, use the request animation method, the request animation frame method to determine the appropriate frame rate for your browser. This helps you optimize for different screen sizes, the type of browser you're using, and will result in more fluid and smooth animations. Here at Salesforce, we believe that everyone should be able to equally use our product, and that's why we believe in accessible animations. To make your animations accessible, avoid flashing and looping, as this could have negative health effects on your user. Always provide text equivalents for informational animations so that if a user chooses to turn off animations, they still get that same information they would have had otherwise. And we always follow the rule that shorter is better. Try to stick to animations that are 2 to 3 seconds long. Anything longer than that could create a perceived lag in load time instead of an aid in load time. So the key takeaways for today that I want you to leave with is that animation, whether you think of that as motion or kinetic interfaces or responsiveness, it helps the user. It steers user focus, it guides their attention, it gives them meaningful feedback and information, and provides context and orientation by creating a mental model of a product. All of this improves the overall user experience for your product. Tying those back to our 4 core design principles, animation can improve clarity, drive efficiency for your user, enhance consistency across your product ecosystem, and strengthen brand narrative. Animation can be performant, accessible, and effective when following the principles of animation. We are thinking about animation here at Salesforce, and you should too when building out your products and applications. Here are a few resources to help you on your journey towards animation. First, the Lightning Design System animation guidelines. If you haven't already, I strongly suggest you guys head over to Camp Design and talk to a few people about what we're doing on the design system to help you implement animations into your product. Visit our page to look at our gallery, our timing, effects, and dimension guidelines, and see what you can do with animation. Here are a few developer resources that I find really helpful. The first is the GreenSock Animation Library. It's a JavaScript library that optimizes your animations for different browsers and helps make them more performant. The second are a couple of animation performant guidelines, and I think if you see these slides online, you'll be able to click on these links. A few CSS tutorials on how to make animations in CSS, and animations in React Native for mobile. And last, if you didn't learn anything from this presentation, I have to leave you with the best burrito in San Francisco, which is at El Farolito, 24th and Mission. So make sure you go before you leave San Francisco. All right, cool. Thank you so much. Yeah. I don't think we have a mic for questions, but I'm happy to take any questions by coming down and, yeah.